screen that you see here is going to be a quick presentation just so that you can understand what you're seeing today. The one thing I'd like to ask you to do is if you haven't liked us on Facebook, I would ask that you do that. The reason I'm going to ask you to do that is because we have a lot of content going up on Facebook. We have blog posts, we have videos, we have technology updates that are going on. You're going to see videos from our management team here at UFC coming on our Facebook pages and Twitter and LinkedIn. So just stay in tune with us. Facebook is a great way to get started, but if you're a LinkedIn person, you're a Twitter person, please follow us there. We could definitely use your likes and your follows, and I think you're going to find the information very helpful as well. Today's topics is going to be pretty basic. We're going to have a quick did you know about UFC. Some of you folks may not be in contact with us as often as other folks, so we're going to just ask you, did you know this about UFC? And then we're going to get right to learning. So that's going to be our plan today. I just wanted to make sure everybody on the call understood what UFC provides in an array of products and services. When you're talking about Quillix, you're going to see things on your left like input sources, and these are ways that documents are submitted into the system. We have different technology that does imports. We can read emails from our email gateway products We have a batch import. We can also read from FileNet. So just tons of different input sources that we want to make sure you're aware of. And these products are getting updated on a weekly or at least bi-weekly basis. So we have releases coming out pretty often. So if you ever have questions or you want to know about a feature or want to know if we have a product that does something you're looking to do, let us know. We also have tons of Qsx plugins. These are the plugins that get used in your workflows. We have plugins that do OCR and data extraction. We work with FileNet, SharePoint, OpenText, Documentum. We have different QSXs that help us route things on a certain basis and can even do emails when certain flags occur. So a lot of different options there. I also wanted to make sure you understood what some of our specialties are. When I say specialties, I mean this is what makes UFC different than any other OCR or document management consultant in the market. We do a lot of invoice and purchase order processing. So as invoices are coming into your organization today, we can read the information off using our OCR technology and process those straight to your accounting system. And we also do what we call document classification. If you're not sure what that term means, it's called digital mail rooms sometimes in the market. And really that is, it just helps us determine what a document is. Is it a purchase order? Is it an invoice? Is it a receipt? Is it a travel expense report? We can determine what a document is as it's going through our document management system. So those are some of our specialties. We use two of the very best products in the market to do that. That is Abby, definitely best in the market, and Iris, also a very high marketed item there. So we're using the very best because we want to be special in these. We want these to make us different, and that's why we've chosen some of those specialties. And lastly, I want you to know about our services. We offer training in your Quillix systems. If you're struggling and you think, hey, I could use some customized training for my Quillix system, we want to make sure that that is offered for you, and we provide that, and some of our experts provide that here at UFC. We, of course, can help with document migration. So if you're going from, for example, FileNet to another system, or you want to transfer everything into SharePoint, for example, that's where our document migration services can help. We also have custom development options, so if you need something special related to document management, we can handle that. And of course, if you just need some general consulting, hey Travis, we just need to understand what the best practice is in this scenario, that's where we are experts in. So that's what we do. We provide not just QSX and Quillix plugins, but we have some specialties in the market using the very best products that are out there today. So that's quick. That's all you have from UFC from this perspective. Now let's get to learning. What I'm going to do, I'm going to switch this over to Ed, and Ed's going to share with you our topic today, which is Quillix daily monitoring and management, so that you can learn the best practices of monitoring your Quillix system. So Ed, I'm going to make you organizer.
Alrighty. Okay, so everybody, it looks like should be able to hear me. So what we're going to do is just going to take a look at the audit log and the performance monitor within Quillix. Please use the question panel if you have any questions, and I'll be happy to address them for you. So right now, we've got an audit log. The system's busy processing right now. I've got several inputs. And so this is kind of the view you might see on any given kind of day. Batches getting created, things processing through. The thing is, what do you do when you get errors, and how do you know what's really going on with the system? Well, one of the biggest tools that can help you here is our Quillix Performance Monitor. The Performance Monitor can be launched here from this button on the Home tab, or what I do is just pin it to the Start menu. So here's what the Performance Monitor looks like. So right now it's pointed to our local Quillix server, and that's indicated by a period here. You can type the name of any Quillix server on your network and monitor it by clicking the Fetch button. So if you have a multi-server environment, you just type your server name here, and you can query it to see what's going on. So I'm going to poll my system. Right now what we're going to look at is the inputs and the other threads that are running. So we've got three inputs right now. Batch import. Batch import is typically used for reprocessing or testing. In my system here, you can see that I've been using it rather extensively. You can see that there's 125 cases been input. Email gateway, or EG in this case, this is the name of your input source, so as it's defined in the server group here. So in my case, I've got EG testing with Exchange, and then I've also got a MuWave import instance here. So what these numbers mean here are the cases that have been picked up and processed and submitted, and how often the input source checks. So time of last input shows you when the module input a batch. So in this case, 229, 307, 305. Last call means the last time that the input source was pulled. Usually this should line up with current, more or less. So each module is going to pull fairly often, with certain exceptions being like email gateway has its own scheduling, because we don't want to hammer an input, or don't want to hammer too hard on an email server. So in this case, batch import last checked to see if there was anything to process as the current time, and the last time it was empty was the current time. So you can see that it has been a while since something came in. Email gateway, however, will stay current in that it should be processing things fairly often. So you can see time of last input, 309, last check was 309, and then the last case that it was, last time it was pulled with nothing was 307. Import, same kind of thing. So you can see the number of cases that you're processing. So this is a good way to easily see that all of your input sources are functioning with it by watching for expected numbers here and making sure that the times line up and make sense. What we have down here are the Qsx threads. This is going to be a mostly specific to MuWave type of conversation. So you can see we've got MuWave export, MuWave forms, and rendition. The other three are built-in Quillix functions that will always appear here regardless of any settings elsewhere in the system. Assembly, queue, and queue completions. While prevalent would much be better off to explain them than I, these are just their processes that affect the batch and creation of documents as it goes through. Different Qsx modules have different levels of CPU intensity based on their function. So in the case of export here, all it does is copy out to a file share in most situations, so it's pretty fast. In this case, I've got two threads, and that was mostly just for this example. In a production environment, you probably don't even need two threads of export. Forms is where we do image cleanup, deskewing, despeckling, barcode recognition, and some cases OCR, depending on the environment. So it's going to be much more CPU intensive. So in a case like rendition, or in a case of forms, you may want to have multiple threads and increase the thread counts to keep your bottlenecks down and in check and make sure everything goes through as quickly as possible. We'll talk a little bit more about some of that here shortly. Some of the numbers that you're going to see here may look a little confusing, and I'm going to go ahead and try to explain them as best I can. So you've got a waiting count column here. What this waiting count means is how many cases are out there that need time from any particular Qsx module. Now what this means here is that there are 282 total cases waiting to go through rendition. Granted, there are two threads, so it shows 282 twice, but really you could think of it in a form of about each one's going to ideally get 101 cases. Granted, some will take longer to go through than others, so they won't be exact. Now, there are other times when you might see a number of cases here with no activity in the working on column. So what you're seeing here is that, so right now rendition Qsx is actively working on this batch here. So this is the name of the batch, and this is its case ID. So if you were to take this case ID here, you could put it right into the audit log and query based on that case ID there. So when you see a waiting count without a working on count, what that indicates and can tell you here is that there are, in my system, in my example here, 4 cases that are failing and retrying. Right now they're sitting in the error interval, which is I think set to 20 minutes on my machine. So you won't see anything actively being worked on regarding these cases unless there's a new case that comes in, which you can see here. So we got a new email batch come in and then a new import batch. Just going back to my notes here. Bear with me, I'm trying to learn this new GoToWebinar software, so I'm just looking to see if there's any questions or anything like that. Looks good. Okay. So you can see the number of cases that are waiting for any particular QSX module. You can see the case ID here that Quillix is actively working on at this time. You can see the total number of cases that have been processed through each thread here. And you can see the rough seconds per case. As far as this information goes, I really don't use this very often. It can be widely different because a one-page batch might go through in a couple milliseconds, whereas a 1,000-page batch that has lots of barcodes to read is going to take much longer. Errors can tell you how many cases were logged an error while processing. As far as the number here, prevalent would be better off answering what it means to them, because sometimes we don't exactly see clear exact numbers that line up here versus what we see in the audit log. In these cases, I know that there are a couple cases that I have out on my system to intentionally fail. So in this case, we know we've got some cases failing, so what we want to do is try and figure out what's going on. So let's go to the audit log and take a look. So again, the audit log is filled with a lot of information that changes fast. How can you use this information useful? What we do, and what I recommend, is to simply sort through your severities and look for errors on the system. So right now what I did is I went right out there and I selected fatals. So I'm just going to run a search. So I returned this number of total fatal errors here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at these. So you can see we've got some cases that are at least failing in forms, some stuff in rendition. So what I'm going to do is look at these errors. So this says rendition said the file could not be converted because it's not a supported file type. There's some rather cryptic information here that we write to this, but at the end of the day, we try to do the best we can to make a nice error message. And in this case, what the message means is that this is not a supported file type, and the file extension was XXX. That's a case I did intentionally to make it fail. In this case here, we're looking through another one. We can see that, again, it says it's not a supported file type. Okay, so what's that mean? Well, in this case, the file extension looks like it says 1 something there, so there's some junk on the end. Maybe the file was renamed and the extension was messed up. In this case, I know for sure it is because I did it on purpose. Forms error. Well, this really doesn't tell us anything, and we need to know information, because if you sent this to us in a support request, I wouldn't really be able to tell you any more about this either, and I'm going to ask for more information. So in a case like this where we've got an error that really doesn't tell us anything, we need to find more info. How do we find more info? Well, we'll start by looking at the case ID. So we've got 39626 here. So what I'm going to do, close this message, come over here, and I'm going to get that information here. So we said 39626. So I can run the search, and I can see that it only logs one message. Well, that's because we're selected to fatal, so let's see all severity. Okay, so we can see where the batch was created. We can see where it started processing the file in forms, in rendition. You can see where it processed through rendition successfully. You can see where we get into forms, and it looks like we had some problems. So recreated the forms processing engine due to a failure in image.1, or image number 1. What this means is that the XML told forms to process the first image. Forms says, hey, there's a problem processing this image, and this is the type of error I'm getting back from my toolkit internally. It's telling us here we're trying to open this file, and it gives us the path to it. So the image number 1 is image.2 in this batch. That's why it's imperative to really look closely at these messages and understand what you're seeing. So Forms tries to do this twice, so you can see that it's thrown this same message in there twice. It said failed to read barcodes, batch will be tried later, and then you can see the default Quillix error message here saying that the case will be retried. So when you don't really know what the error means, the best thing to do is to just try and get all of this data as possible here and just send it to us. So I might do something like take my screen snip tool and just grab this information here and save this so that we can see what's going on and the information within. Sometimes we find cases with the same batch name. So what we'll do in those cases is we'll look to see when we have a batch name in here. We'll get a batch name, for example, and we'll search on this batch name. Now, I think that in this particular case, we're going to find that this batch has only come in one time. But in other instances, you might find that there'll be multiple batches with the same name here, but which one is it that is actually causing the problem? Well, in the cases like that, you would use the case ID, and you could come over here in this column to find it. So, yeah, the message column is long. You can expand it here and drag them around to shorten things up. But if you had a duplicate batch name, you come over here to your case ID column, grab your case ID, put that information over here, and once you figure out which case ID is the problem, you can search on the case ID and find information for just that. It's pretty common for cases to either end up with duplicate names one way or another. Maybe the user is creating a batch and they thought something went wrong, so they created it again and changed the name. It's not all that uncommon. Different severities can mean different things. Oops. Let me get out of here, clear this out. And so again, we're going to start off by looking for fatal messages. We talked about some of the errors we see here. We'll come back, we'll switch up to error and see if there's anything else coming through. So in this case, we see, what's this message? MeWave import. Okay, so MeWave import logged an error level message, and it says it encountered a busy or locked file while it was trying to import this batch. The file will be skipped. In most cases, you'll find that it'll just simply retry, and there's the message saying it'll retry again. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, so in this case, it would retry on the next cycle and typically pick the batch up, or pick the file up, create a batch. Some of the things that you'll find is that, it's easy to find this particular type of message, failed processing batch name in QSX, case will be retried. So this isn't an error. If you send me this in a ticket, there's nothing I can ascertain from this information here, so I'm going to ask for more information. Again, this would be the type of thing where you go back, take your case ID, put it in your case ID field, and you can find more information. One of the things I want to talk about is performance through Quillix. And to do so, we're going to go back and we're going to look again at our performance monitor here. And we're going to talk about the performance monitor and number of threads. So I mentioned earlier CPU intensity. So MeWave export is not overly CPU intensive. There's not any barcode or OCR type of operations being done. We're just writing to a file share, and we can do that pretty quickly. Where we have intense modules that you can see here as a significant bottleneck compared to other modules is where we might want to open up an additional thread. How do we know when we can open up an additional thread? Well, when you're seeing a bottleneck, you would definitely want to look into why is there a bottleneck and what can I do to improve it. So in this case, I'd say, let's probably go with an additional thread for rendition. And to know if we can do that, we want to check and make sure we've got the hardware to do it. So the task manager here for Server 2012 it doesn't quite show you as nicely as the older one did, in my opinion, but we know we've got 4 sockets and 4 virtual, and with a total of 8 virtual processors. So when QSXs are CPU intensive, we don't want to configure a thread count above the number of CPU cores that we have available. So each thread for a CPU intensive QSX will usually have CPU time being used here. So in the case of, say, rendition, you can see we've got rendition console processes running, and all of these can take a considerable amount of CPU time. And if we have a process that uses all of our CPU time and does it for an extended period, say we're OCRing a 1,000-page PDF or image file into a searchable PDF, it's going to take some time to do that. So we can't take and dedicate all of our CPU time to certain Quillix processes, because then there'll be no CPU time for things like World Wide Web publishing services, any kind of Windows overhead in general, and etc. You tie up all of the CPU time, and the user interfaces will all become very slow, and it can just cause errors in general. So when you adjust your thread counts, you want to make sure that your thread counts are aligned with what kind of hardware you have. Big high-performance machines, you can increase the threads. On slower development machines, you need to decrease the thread so that you don't overload the CPU and cause errors otherwise. There is a point of diminishing return. On a machine with, say, 32 processors, there's really not going to be much advantage of seeing, say, 16 or 20 some processes of just rendition, because at some point there is just simply diminishing return. What I would recommend in situations like that is just adjustment and monitoring. So check the performance monitor. Watch how fast your numbers are going down. You can see in this case we got through 100 cases fairly quick, so we can watch and see how things are going. So we can see the numbers dropping fairly quickly. So we might just have a periodic increase in workload that requires just time to catch up. If we are consistently seeing a bottleneck for a particular process, increase the thread counts 1 or 2, but just make sure your hardware lines up. Make sure that when you check your task manager, you're not seeing that the CPU is consistently at 100% or overly close to it. One of the last things I'm going to mention here would be considerations for your third-party connectors. As Travis had mentioned, we can commit to SharePoint, FileNet, P8, many others. Typically, the way that those systems work is it's more like a handoff from Quillix to the third-party API. And in some instances, we don't have a lot of control over that. So when you're going to stop the Quillix service, either to, say, activate a profile or make any kind of config changes, you want to be careful to check your performance monitor so you can make sure that there's no cases out there that are queued for something like FileNet or P8. If you stop the service midway through a FileNet commit, what can happen is it's a handoff operation. So when the service in Quillix is stopping, it is possible, although rare and hard to do, it is possible to tell the Quillix service to stop during a committal, and when that commit is handed off, we wait for the FileNet API, for example, to say, hey, we committed the document, now this case is complete, now Quillix, you go ahead and mark it for completion. So if we stop the service, Quillix will never get that confirmation that the document was committed and has completed, and so when it is restarted, that case will still be marked as pending and then will likely result in a duplicated commit